A gloved hand crushed Dr. Lena Ortiz's windpipe against the ICU supply room door at 3:07 a.m., and the first sound she heard was not her own choking, but the hollow thud of her heels skipping across waxed tile as Gavin Hartwell drove her backward and held her there. Disinfectant burned the air. The corridor hummed with fluorescent ballast and the distant beep, beep, beep of telemetry monitors in rooms where people were trying to stay alive. Her shoulder blades hit metal shelving through the door. Her trachea flattened under the heel of his palm. A thin whistle of air slid in and never made it all the way down. Her hands shot up on instinct, fingers digging under his wrist, searching for tendon, leverage, anything. His thumb shifted higher, pressing under her jaw, and white sparks burst at the edges of her vision. He laughed and lifted his phone with his free hand, angling the camera so it caught her face, and the hospital logo stenciled on the opposite wall in dark blue letters. "Say it," he said. "Say you overstepped." Lena tried to speak. The words came out as a torn rasp. "Please, can't breathe." His grip tightened. Purple crept up her neck in a flush she could feel before she could see it. Her pulse hammered into his glove. The gloves smelled like expensive leather and hand sanitizer. He wore a dark jacket over a white t-shirt. Designer sneakers bright against the institutional floor. $400 sunglasses pushed into his hair like a crown he forgot to take off. He had that easy, polished posture of men who had never been made to stop. He tilted the phone, checked the frame, and smiled at his own screen as if this were just another clip for a private feed. "You're dramatic," he said. By Lena's count, the corridor held 21 witnesses in that loop between ICU and Central Supply. 21. Two night nurses stood at the crash cart alcove with medication cups in gloved hands, both frozen, both watching. A transport tech with a rolled stretcher paused 10 feet away and stared at the red stripe on the floor that marked emergency egress, as if reading policy from paint could excuse inaction. An intern in blue scrubs held a chart open and kept moving his pen in tiny fake notes without writing anything at all. A janitor with ear protection around his neck gripped a mop handle so hard his knuckles blanched. A security guard near the fire door stared at the floor buffer marks on his boots and did not lift his head. Nobody moved. Lena's right hand slipped on Gavin's sleeve, found his wrist again, and squeezed with all the force she had left. She had treated collapsed lungs in field tents. She had run triage under mortar alarms. She knew exactly what oxygen debt felt like, and exactly how fast a body failed when the airway narrowed. Her chest drew in hard, ribs flaring, but his forearm blocked the expansion. Sound narrowed. The monitor beeps down the hallway stretched out, distant and wrong, like they were coming through water. "Please," she whispered again, thinner now. He leaned closer so the camera caught both faces. "You don't say no to me in my building." "My building." He said it like anatomy, like the heart has 4 chambers, like blood is red. One of the nurses took half a step forward, then stopped when Gavin flicked his eyes her way without turning his head. She looked down at the medication cups, then back at Lena, and her mouth trembled once before she went still. Nobody helped. Nobody spoke. Nobody called Code Gray. A patient monitor alarm chirped from inside ICU room 12 and then silenced itself. Somewhere behind the double doors, a ventilator exhaled with mechanical patience. Inside the corridor loop, time compressed to pressure, tile, glove, and the unignorable fact that a physician was being strangled under security cameras in a hospital owned in pieces by the man hurting her. Gavin moved his phone higher. "Tell me you're sorry." Lena's vision tunneled. She saw details with brutal clarity and no context. The chipped edge of the supply room placard, the tiny crescent scar on his left thumb from an old cut, the reflection of overhead lights in his phone lens and over his shoulder, the security guard still studying his boots, as if the scuffs on black leather required urgent review. Her airway narrowed to a thread. Panic hit in a clean, clinical wave, hands cold, hearing muffled, fingers weak. She was 32 years old, Army combat medic turned ER physician, and she was about to lose consciousness in front of people who knew her name, knew her work, knew she had started this shift 8 hours ago and still had 4 to go. She could feel the collapse approaching in increments, jaw numb, knees unsteady, grip failing. Gavin laughed again, lower this time, enjoying the visible countdown. "That's better," he said to the phone. "Get this angle." He pivoted slightly to keep her in frame. The motion dragged her throat against his glove, and pain flashed hot along her larynx. Her heels slid, squealing over wax. She caught one breath, half of one, enough to cough once against his hand. The cough turned into a dry gag. He did not flinch. Across from them, the intern finally looked up from his chart. His eyes met hers for 1 second. He looked away first. 21 witnesses. Not one intervened. At the nurse's station, a unit clerk stood with a handset in her palm, thumb hovering over internal security extension 77. She watched Gavin's phone. She watched his family name on the embroidery of his jacket cuff. She set the handset down without dialing. To Lena, institutional fear had a smell. Fear. It smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee and the metallic bite of HVAC air at 3 in the morning when it seemed clear who counted and who did not. Lena's fingers went weaker on his wrist. She tried a heel strike and missed, her balance gone. Her back bounced against the door with a hollow clang. Gavin smiled wider at the sound, at the way the corridor recoiled and stayed frozen. He was filming with his right hand, choking with his left, and his breathing remained calm and even. Practice. Pattern. Repetition. It felt to Lena like this had happened before. From the faces in that corridor, it appeared they sensed the same thing, even if no one had seen this exact clip. A transport pager buzzed on someone's belt. No one answered it. The security guard finally lifted his head, and for a fraction of a second, Lena believed he would step in. His shoulders tensed. His right hand touched his radio. Then he saw Gavin's face fully, saw the Hartwell jawline, saw the cuff monogram, and his hand dropped back to his side. He looked back to the floor. Lena's pulse thudded in her ears so hard it sounded like footsteps coming fast. But there were no footsteps, only her blood forcing itself through a narrowing channel. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out but air-starved noise. Her left eye watered. The edge of the supply door frame dug into her spine. The fluorescent lights turned harsh and then dim. Harsh and then dim. As if the hallway were flickering even though it wasn't. Gavin lowered his face to hers and spoke softly, for her alone this time, the camera still rolling. "You file one more complaint. I'll make sure you never work in this county again." His breath smelled like mint gum and coffee. His words carried no strain, only certainty. The janitor looked at the mop bucket and began wringing the mop head with deliberate, mechanical motions, water dripping in steady taps that sounded obscenely normal while Lena fought for one usable inhale. Tap, tap, tap. Cowardice had rhythms, too. At the far end of the corridor, just past the ICU swing doors, a tan and black shape came into view. Saddleback coat, dark as iron in shadow, moving beside a broad-shouldered man in NWU Type 3 camouflage. The dog's ears rotated forward first. Then his body locked. A growl began low in his chest, not loud, but so steady it seemed to thicken the air. Then Atlas moved. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe veterans and service dogs should never be discarded when they age, subscribe and stay until the end. What happened in that corridor rewired who held power in Ridgemont by sunrise. The words of that promise seemed to hang over the corridor like a held breath. And in that held breath, Atlas crossed the threshold from observer to correction. His ears pinned forward first. His body went rigid next. A growl rolled in his chest, low and steady, more felt than heard. A vibration in tile and metal and bone. Spencer's hand tightened on the leash, just enough to direct, not restrain, and the old German shepherd advanced, with a measured gait that protected his left hip, without surrendering 1 inch of intent. 10 years old, 87 pounds, tan and black saddleback coat that turned gold in sunlight and dark as iron in shadow. In that fluorescent hallway, with the light flattening every human face into fatigue and fear, Atlas looked carved from darker material. Lena felt the vibration before she saw him clearly. Her vision had narrowed to a tunnel, ringed in static, but the growl cut through the ringing in her ears like a line thrown to a drowning swimmer. Gavin's glove still crushed her throat. Her fingers still slipped on his wrist. Her lungs still stuttered for oxygen. But one thing changed with clinical certainty. The room stopped pretending this was normal. The transport tech with the rolled stretcher took a full step backward, not away from violence, but away from Gavin. The janitor's wringing hands froze over the mop bucket, water streaming from the twisted cloth in a crooked line that splashed his boots. One of the night nurses dropped 2 medication cups. Plastic skittered across tile. Tiny white tablets scattered into the corridor seams. She didn't look down to collect them. Even the security guard lifted his head fully this time. Spencer did not hurry. That was the part that unsettled everyone first. Men who feared losing control usually rushed into chaos with loud voices and broad gestures. Spencer moved with the opposite economy, as if urgency and calm were not opposites to him, but tools he had learned to hold in the same hand. He wore NWU Type 3 camouflage like a second skin, collar clean, sleeves rolled to scarred forearms, shoulders broad from years of load-bearing work instead of gym mirrors. A pale line crossed his jaw where old shrapnel had cut and healed. His beard was close trimmed. His eyes were the difficult gray of storm water. He stopped 6 feet from Gavin, close enough to intervene, far enough to read angles. Atlas shifted half a pace ahead of Spencer's left knee and locked in place. Not lunging, not barking, waiting. That disciplined stillness hit the corridor harder than any shout could have. Gavin's smile broke first, not completely, but at the corners. He kept filming with his right hand, though the phone dipped by a few degrees. Lena's face remained in frame, but Atlas was in it now, too. And Spencer's boots, and the edge of camouflage that did not belong in Gavin's private theater of humiliation. Gavin adjusted his grip on Lena's throat, thumb pressing harder under her jaw, as if pressure itself could restore the hierarchy he was used to. "Keep moving," he said without looking away from Spencer. "This doesn't concern you." No one answered him. Lena's knees threatened to fold. Her fingertips had gone numb. Her chest convulsed against blocked airflow, trying to drag oxygen past narrow tissue. She knew from field medicine exactly how close syncope could sit, quiet and absolute, at the edge of vision. She also knew canines. She knew what she was seeing in Atlas's posture. Controlled readiness, target fixation, permission pending. The old dog's weight favored his right side, but his front paws were planted like anchors. His gaze stayed on Gavin's choking hand and nowhere else. A monitor alarm burst from ICU room 14 and cut off again. Spencer's gaze tracked once, quickly, from Gavin's phone to Lena's carotid, pulse point to Gavin's stance, to the wet patch under the janitor's mop bucket. traction, footing, range. He took in the security camera dome above the fire door and the blinking red LED that meant active recording. He looked at the security guard for 1 second, and the guard's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without words. The intern with the fake chart notes finally lowered his pen. No one in that corridor knew what Spencer had done on his 11 deployments. They did not know the names of the compounds, the count of night breaches, the medevac calls answered too late. They did not know about Yemen or 19 minutes on a floor slick with dust and blood, while he held pressure on Chief Nolan Reed and listened to rotor silence where rotors should have been. They didn't need details. They only needed what they could read now: a man who was not bluffing and a dog who would not miss. Gavin tried to reclaim center stage with volume. "Do you know who I am?" His voice came out sharper than he intended. The question was for the room, not Spencer, a ritual invocation of inherited immunity. The same one that had worked on nurses, interns, contractors, and board deputies for years. Spencer said nothing yet. Atlas's growl deepened by 1 register. Not loud, decisive. Lena's right hand found Gavin's wrist again, weaker now but purposeful. She pressed 2 fingers into the radial side where pulse sat close to skin and tendon. Not enough force to break a hold. Enough to remind herself she still had agency, still had training, still existed outside his camera frame. Her eyes watered hard. The corridor lights smeared into streaks. She heard someone near the nurse's station whisper, "Oh, God," then clamp their own mouth shut. Gavin's phone vibrated with an incoming notification. He ignored it. The screen lit for a split second, reflecting in his sunglasses on his head, and Lena saw her own face on that glass, purple and distorted and shrinking. Gavin saw it too. He raised his chin. "My father runs this board," he said. "Security works for us." The sentence landed and fell flat. He did not realize this was the exact kind of statement that stopped working the instant it met someone immune to local leverage. That Spencer had spent years in places where titles meant little and behavior meant everything. Or that Atlas had already flagged him more than once in spaces he assumed were private. Spencer took 1 step forward. The sound of his boot on tile was small. It still echoed. At the nurse's alcove, the older of the 2 night nurses straightened her spine for the first time in that encounter. Her eyes flicked to the code phone, then to Spencer, then to Lena's throat. She didn't move yet. Fear had not vanished. It had changed shape. The room's axis had tilted, and everyone felt it in their own body before they understood it with language. Lena caught a shred of air, then coughed against Gavin's palm. Pain lanced across her larynx and up behind her ears. Her legs trembled so hard her scrub pants shook at the knees. She looked at Spencer, then at Atlas, then back to the hand crushing her airway. This was the hinge. She knew it the way medics know when a patient is about to turn, for better or worse, within the next few seconds. Atlas edged his head lower, eyes never leaving Gavin's forearm. His hackles lifted in a clean ridge along his shoulders. The old hip held. Gavin noticed the hip then, maybe for the first time, and a flicker of contempt returned to his face. "That dog's retired," he said. "He's done." Atlas did not blink. Spencer's expression did not shift either, but his left thumb brushed once behind Atlas's ear in a signal so slight most people missed it. Those who saw it could not name why it unsettled them. It looked tender. It looked operational. It looked like a language written through years, not days. In the unit clerk's station glass, reflections layered together, Lena pinned at the door, Gavin filming, Atlas coiled in discipline, Spencer standing like a line no one crossed twice. The clerk's hand hovered over extension 77 again, and this time she kept it there. hold this image for one moment longer, because this was where most people looked away and pretended they had no role in what came next. Tell us where you're watching from, because stories like this never belong to one hallway in one town. And silence like this never stayed local for long. If you believe veterans and service dogs should not be discarded when they age out of someone's spreadsheet, subscribe and stay to the end. You're about to see how a single corridor at 3:07 a.m. forced a whole power structure into daylight. Lena was still losing air. Gavin was still filming. 21 witnesses were still choosing who they were in real time. But the old script had already cracked, and everyone in that loop felt it. The old script had already cracked, and Lena felt it in the tiny gap of air she stole between Gavin's fingers. But the force that brought her to that corridor had been building for months, one ignored warning at a time. Now let's go back to the beginning. Lena Ortiz had turned 32 on a Tuesday she spent in Trauma Bay 3, peeling off bloody gloves while a microwave burrito went cold in her locker. By midnight, she had forgotten it was her birthday at all, until Mateo's face appeared on her phone screen, with frosting on his cheek and 8 crooked candles jammed into a grocery store cupcake. He had grinned into the camera and said, "I saved one for you, Tia." And that had broken her open more cleanly than any battlefield memory ever did. She had been an Army combat medic first, then a civilian emergency physician, because the part of her that triaged panic into action never learned how to do anything else. In uniform, she had learned to count breaths under mortar noise and choose who could wait and who could not. In Ridgemont General, she learned a different triage algorithm: who had insurance leverage, who had family leverage, and who was expected to absorb harm quietly because the hospital could not afford bad optics. The medicine was still medicine. The politics was bloodless and mean. Her sister Sophia died 2 years earlier, sudden and ordinary in the worst way, an undetected arrhythmia in an apartment laundry room with a basket of school uniforms still warm from the dryer. Mateo had been 6 then, asleep on the couch with a science workbook open on his chest. By dawn, Lena had signed temporary guardianship paperwork with shaking hands and promised a social worker she would make the schedule work. She never said how. She still wasn't sure she had. Her apartment was 15 minutes from the hospital when traffic cooperated, 25 when school buses clogged Cedar Avenue. She rented the second-floor units above a locksmith shop that smelled like machine oil and old brass. Mateo's room was small but precise. Dinosaur lamp, blue blackout curtains, 3 stuffed dogs lined up under the pillow because he said they stood guard while he slept. Lena kept a legal folder in the kitchen drawer beside the takeout menus, color-tabbed for custody hearings, school attendance logs, pediatric records, and the notarized letter from Sophia naming Lena as preferred guardian if anything happened. She read that letter on the 1st of every month like a private oath. Her defining ritual began before dawn. 2 alarms, always. 1 at 4:20 a.m. for rounds and pre-op checks. 1 at 6:35 a.m., labeled Call Mateo. If she was in the hospital, she stepped into an empty consult room and video called him before school, hair still tied back from overnight shift, stethoscope mark pressed into the side of her neck. He held up his backpack for inspection, sometimes mismatched shoes, sometimes a missing permission slip. She corrected what she could through a screen and told him the same line each morning. "You are not alone today." He answered the same way. "Copy that, Doc Tia." He liked military words because he thought they made him brave. By the second week of October, the night charge nurses had started guarding that 6:35 window for her without making it sentimental. Margot at the desk diverted non-critical pages for 4 minutes. Keisha covered Lena's patients, unless a monitor screamed. No speeches, no pity. Just professionals protecting one of their own from the attrition that came for women who raised children on rotating shifts and court deadlines. Lena did not ask for special treatment anywhere else. She picked up doubles when the pediatric unit ran short. She taught new interns to read shock on skin tone before lab values confirmed it. She corrected sloppy charting with a red pen and a steady voice. She stood too straight when administrators walked through, a habit from formations she could not unlearn. Her personnel file called her highly competent, occasionally inflexible. In plain language, she did not bend for men who confused access with authority. That made her useful in every code and inconvenient in every meeting. The first complaint she filed had nothing to do with herself. It was about a respiratory therapist named April, who came out of a supply room crying, scrub top torn at the shoulder seam, saying only that she wanted to go home. Lena documented what she saw, time-stamped 1:14, photographed the torn seam with April's permission, and walked the report to hospital risk management before end of shift. 48 hours later, she received a secure email. Issue reviewed. Unable to substantiate. No further action recommended. The second complaint was her own. Gavin cornered her near radiology and blocked her path with an arm against the wall, smiling as if this were a joke between colleagues. He asked whether she was still playing soldier and touched the dog tag she wore under her scrub top, fingers quick and familiar and uninvited. She shoved his hand away and said, "Do not touch me again." He laughed, stepped back, and bowed theatrically to an audience of 2 transport aides who looked through him like he was weather. Lena documented that too. Same response, unable to substantiate. By late November, she had started saving everything. Screenshots of unknown number text that knew her schedule. Photos of locker room notes folded into paper cranes that read, "Smile more, Doc." A voice message, mail, filtered through hallway echo. "You file one more, and you're done in this county." She uploaded each item to an encrypted drive with date, time, location, and witness names when she could get them. She printed hard copies and sealed them in a manila envelope labeled Ortiz, personal, then locked it in the trunk of her car under a blanket and Mateo's spare soccer cleats. Fear changed the choreography of her days. She parked under camera poles and texted her arrival to Margot. She no longer took the stairwell between 1 and 3 after midnight unless accompanied. She memorized which badge readers failed intermittently near pharmacy storage. She stopped using headphones on the walk from garage to employee entrance. None of this appeared in official policy manuals. Every woman on night shift learned it anyway. Mateo noticed without understanding the architecture of it. One evening he asked why she checked the deadbolt twice now. She told him, "Because habits keep people safe." He nodded like that was enough. He still asked her to leave the hall light on outside his bedroom when she left for overnights. She always did. At school conferences, she came in scrubs with compression socks hidden under slacks, eyes shadowed from back-to-back shifts, still answering every question about reading levels and peer dynamics as if no other life existed. Ms. Delaney, Mateo's third-grade teacher, once said softly, "He listens for your call every morning before attendance." Lena smiled, then sat in her car afterward with both hands on the wheel until the tremor in her fingers passed. She had seen men die in dust and men live against probability because one person refused to leave. She had no appetite for helplessness dressed up as realism. When colleagues whispered, "That's just how this place works," Lena heard surrender, not wisdom. She kept filing. The hospital began treating her like a systems problem. Her shift requests were denied more often. Her name appeared on 2 professional communication coaching invitations she never requested. An assistant administrator she had never met advised her to focus on team cohesion and avoid informal allegations that increase liability exposure. When Lena asked what allegation was informal about an incident report with timestamps, the woman smiled thinly and repeated the phrase liability exposure like it explained gravity. It explained power. Ridgemont General looked like a community institution from the outside. Brick, glass, donor plaques, a healing garden no one used in winter. Inside, everyone understood the map. Hartwell family money underwrote 2 towers and 3 executive salaries. Hartwell Contracting handled security staffing. Hartwell Counsel reviewed high-risk complaints. Hartwell Gifts funded campaign dinners for county offices that approved permits and looked the other way when approvals bent. The hospital smelled like antiseptic. The structure smelled like protection racket without the honesty of naming itself. Lena learned to read the warning signs in people's faces when she said Gavin's name. Eyes dropped, shoulders tightened, voices lowered by reflex. Men who could intubate in moving ambulances suddenly found reasons to leave the room. Women who had mentored interns through panic attacks advised caution in phrases that sounded practical and tasted like defeat. "He's trouble," one senior attending told her in the lounge, stirring powdered creamer into coffee until it turned gray. "You can't win that fight here." Lena answered, "Then here is broken." The attending looked at the door before replying. "I didn't say you were wrong." In December, she filed a formal grievance with the board's ethics line, attaching prior reports and a signed statement that retaliation had begun. She received an automated case number and a promise of review in 10 business days. On day 11, a man from compliance support called from a blocked number and asked whether she wanted to withdraw to preserve collegiality. She said no. He paused, then said, "This call did not occur," and disconnected. 3 nights later, someone slashed one tire on her car in the employee garage. Just one. Clean cut in the sidewall, surgical and deliberate. Security cameras covering that row were temporarily offline for maintenance. That was when she called Spencer Foster. She knew him only as the quiet SEAL on temporary assignment who moved through the hospital with Atlas during veteran support rounds and contractor evaluations. He had once fixed Mateo's toy drone in a waiting room without introducing himself, then handed it back with loose rotor pin. Mateo talked about him for a week. Lena had noticed the scars on Spencer's hands and the way Atlas watched doorways before anyone else did. She did not ask for favors that night. She asked one question. "If I document this right," she said on the phone from her parked car, voice controlled, "does it still matter if no one wants to see it?" Spencer took a breath before answering. "Document anyway." That was all. Across town, Gavin Hartwell moved through those same weeks like a man walking on carpet no one else could see. And the carpet had his family name woven into every thread. He was 24 and wore entitlement, like cologne, expensive, persistent, hard to wash out. Designer sneakers in sterile corridors, leather jackets over hospital guest badges, $400 sunglasses pushed into his hair at midnight because rules were for other people. He drifted between ICU and admin floors with a camera app open and a half-smile that asked who would stop him. No one had yet. His father, Malcolm Hartwell, chaired the board in practice whether his title said interim or emeritus. The Hartwell Pediatric Tower rose above the east wing in reflective glass, the family name in stainless steel letters visible from the freeway. Donor portraits lined the executive hallway, Malcolm shaking hands, Malcolm cutting ribbon, Malcolm beside a governor no one remembered. In every photo he smiled the same way, as if institutions were heirlooms. Gavin weaponized that inheritance with childlike certainty. "My father owns this place," he told residents when they objected to him filming in restricted areas. "My father pays your department," he told security when they asked for badge verification. "My father can end your contract," he told a night supervisor, who tried once to escort him out of ICU after visiting hours. The supervisor was reassigned to outpatient triage within a week. People called it influence to make it sound legal. The protection system had layers. Complaints entered risk review first, where language softened sharp facts into interpersonal misunderstandings. If a report survived that pass, compliance routed it to counsel, where timelines stretched and witnesses forgot. If something still threatened exposure, a deputy from County Civil Liaison visited to clarify jurisdiction, and suddenly everyone remembered that internal matters stayed internal. Security footage at key moments corrupted or failed export checks. Badge logs around executive corridors showed gaps during exact windows in question. Records were not erased in dramatic ways. They were diluted. By Christmas week, 3 nurses had transferred to other counties after filing harassment notes that went nowhere. A pharmacy tech resigned without notice. A resident physician accepted a fellowship 6 months early and never came back for his final shift. Turnover appeared on spreadsheets as neutral churn. On the floor, it felt like retreat. Lena's grievance file became a quiet legend because she did what others had stopped doing. She insisted on names, dates, corroboration, and persistent follow-up. She printed policy language and highlighted contradictions. She copied neutral administrators before reports disappeared. She requested preservation of camera footage in writing within statutory windows. She made it expensive to ignore her, so the system tried to make her smaller. An email from medical administration questioned her tone in cross-functional communication. A scheduling manager moved her to heavier overnight rotations without explanation. A credentialing clerk misplaced her annual CME documentation, briefly flagging her compliance status, until she produced duplicate receipts. Small pressures, constant pressures. The point was not one blow, the point was where. And still she kept the 6:35 call with Mateo. On the first Monday of January, she stood beneath the Hartwell Tower lettering, with a coffee gone cold, and watched maintenance workers replace a cracked lobby tile, while 2 board members walked past discussing gala seating charts. She looked up at the family name in steel and understood the scale of what she was fighting. Not a bad night. Not one man's temper. A structure designed to absorb harm and protect the source. She touched the badge clipped to her scrub pocket and the hidden dog tags at her chest. In the reflection of the lobby glass, she saw herself. Tired, upright, still in place. By the time that 3:07 a.m. corridor closed around her throat, Gavin believed the outcome had already been written, because every prior test had taught him the same lesson. He could humiliate, threaten, and choke, and the building would hold him like kin. He had no idea one witness in that building did not care about Hartwell Steel, Hartwell contracts, or Hartwell fear. And Atlas had already alerted on him 3 separate times. And Atlas had already alerted on him 3 separate times, which was why Spencer Foster no longer treated anything in Ridgemont as coincidence. He had learned that lesson in places where coincidence got men zipped into transfer bags. Spencer was 38, 6 feet even, shoulders built by rucks and recoil, not vanity, with short, dark hair gone gray at the temples years early, and a pale scar slashing the left side of his jaw where a door charge in Yemen had blown grit and metal through a hallway before his element cleared it. His hands looked older than his face, rope scars across the palms. burn marks along 2 knuckles, a white seam near the thumb web from a shattered windshield, during a medevac run outside Al Hudaydah. He wore NWU Type 3 at Ridgemont because it kept his edges defined. Civilian clothes made him feel unassigned. Unassigned made him hear rotor delay again. The first night Lena called him from the garage, he had been sitting on the floor of his temporary apartment near the old rail yard, back against the couch, Atlas asleep with his chin over Spencer's boot. The apartment smelled like gun oil, instant coffee, and wet wool from a rain shell hung over a chair. Spencer had not slept for 27 hours. He had closed his eyes twice, and each time he was back in Yemen, one knee in concrete dust, both hands clamped over Nolan Reed's abdomen, counting compressions against a pulse that kept fading and returning like bad radio. 19 minutes between call and declared non-arrival. 19 minutes that rewired his life into before and after. Chief Nolan Reed had been 34, JTAC qualified, sarcastic when the room was tense, steady when it mattered, married. One daughter who had mailed him a paper snowflake to Kandahar 3 winters earlier. In Spencer's final clear memory of him alive, Reed had looked up through pain and said, "Don't let me be paperwork." Spencer had answered, "You won't be." Then the bleeding accelerated, and promises became physics. He had attended the burial in dress uniform with his jaw wired from the blast fracture, and his right hand wrapped, stood through the rifle volleys, and watched Reed's wife hold composure until she accepted the folded flag, then fold in half around it, as if gravity had changed. Spencer did not cry at the graveside. He shook once in the rental car after, forehead against the steering wheel, breathing like he had just sprinted a hill under load. Since then, silence had never been neutral again. 3 nights after the funeral, he slept 20 minutes and woke with his hand around an invisible tourniquet strap. By spring, he had requested operational reassignment twice and been denied once for concussion protocol and once for what the psych evaluator called persistent hypervigilance with functional impairment in non-combat environments. Spencer read the report in a fluorescent office and thought the phrase non-combat environments was written by someone who had never been trapped in a polite room where harm wore a badge and smiled. He completed every requirement anyway. He passed every range and endurance benchmark. He stayed deployable on paper. But by his 11th deployment, his command saw what he did not hide well. He could execute under fire without a tremor and still fail to sleep in a locked room with no threat present. The training billet in Ridgemont had been framed as strategic reset, field to institution transfer, oversight of contractor protocols, and K-9 integration drills. He heard the subtext. Keep him useful. Keep him stateside. Keep him from burning through what remained. He took it because refusing would have meant desk suspension, and desk suspension would have taken Atlas. Atlas had moved into his life 2 years earlier through a bureaucratic fight Spencer treated like an operation. The disposition board wanted standard reassignment after the dog's first recovery cycle, then a contractor evaluation, then potential retirement placement with a civilian handler network outside Spencer's chain. Spencer filed for direct handler continuity under medical exception, got denied for service mismatch, appealed, got stalled, then found the one line in a buried policy memo that allowed transfer. When demonstrated, bond continuity improved post-injury response outcomes. He printed the memo, highlighted 6 words, and walked it to legal himself. A lieutenant commander in acquisitions glanced at him across a conference table and said, "Pet attachment is not mission readiness, Chief." Spencer had kept his voice flat. "He's not a pet. He's 10. He was 8 then," Spencer said. and he outperformed your younger dogs last quarter on explosive sweeps with a damaged hip. The lieutenant commander tapped the file. Age curve is age curve. Spencer leaned forward once, jaw scar pulling tight. His age curve pulled 23 Americans out alive. Put that in your model. That room stayed cold for a long second. Then the command veterinarian, gray-haired and careful, slid a supplemental report into the center and said, I recommend conditional retention with current handler. The dog stabilizes under Foster's command voice and shows no cognitive decline in scent discrimination. Paper shifted. Eyes dropped. The vote moved by one signature. Atlas came home with him that week. Cone removed, stitches healed, left hip still stiff in rain. Spencer bought orthopedic mats, a low-rim water bowl, and a second-hand couch because Atlas refused to settle on anything that smelled too new. He also bought blackout curtains he never closed because he trusted moonlight more than darkness. By the second week of his Ridgemont assignment, Spencer had mapped every hallway camera, every blind turn, every exit alarm delay between ICU and pharmacy, not as paranoia, but as baseline. He ran Atlas through low-traffic corridors at 0200 when the hospital smelled like bleach and overbrewed coffee. He logged contractor gaps. He logged badge reader failures. He logged names of security staff who looked away when policy got inconvenient. Logging kept him from spiraling. Documentation gave shape to rage. Sleep still came in fragments. 40 minutes on good nights, 12 on bad ones. He kept a legal pad by the sink and wrote timestamps when he woke. 0043, 0119, 0202, 0311. On the worst nights, he stood at the kitchen window in NWU pants and a gray t-shirt, watching freight lights drift along the rail yard while Atlas pressed against his shin, warm and steady, as if anchoring him to one century. He did not discuss Nolan Reed with anyone in Ridgemont. He did not need to. The wound surfaced in his routines. He checked medevac response times in county disaster binders no one else read. He timed elevator delays from ER to roof access and wrote down the variants. He carried trauma shears and combat gauze in a side pouch, though hospital protocol said Central Supply had everything required. Protocol had said that in Yemen, too. When Lena asked over the phone whether documentation still mattered if no one wanted to see it, Spencer had looked at Atlas's ears twitching in sleep and answered with the only rule that had survived every theater he'd seen. Document anyway, he nearly added. It may not save you today. It may bury them tomorrow. He kept that part to himself. 3 days later, after Lena's slashed tire report, he found her in a side consult room at 6:41 a.m., phone still in her hand after the Mateo call. Her voice had gone rough from fatigue, but her posture stayed combat straight. She looked at him once, eyes bloodshot and clear, and said, If I go down on this, my nephew loses me. Spencer said, You won't stand alone. It was 4 words too many for him. He said them anyway. Atlas lifted his head from beside Spencer's boot and watched Lena for a beat, then pressed his muzzle lightly against her wrist, where her pulse jumped fast and shallow. Lena exhaled through her nose, one controlled breath, and nodded. No one in that room called it comfort. It was acknowledgement between professionals who knew what sustained pressure felt like. Spencer trusted very little in Ridgemont's chain of command. He trusted patterns. He trusted physical evidence. He trusted the old dog at his knee more than any quarterly risk memo stamped confidential. Atlas's service record sat in 3 binders and 1 digital archive that smelled, in Spencer's memory, like dust and copier toner and antiseptic from base veterinary suites. 10 years old, German Shepherd. 11 operational deployments with joint elements across Afghanistan, Yemen, and 2 maritime interdiction cycles in the Gulf. 23 documented lives saved in direct action and post-blast search events. 1 dog, 1 wounded hip, 1 disposition label that said too old for active response in clean administrative font. The label ignored history. Atlas had entered service at 18 months with high drive and unusual nerve stability in confined spaces. His first handler, Sergeant Eli Mercer, taught him scent lanes in Texas heat, doorway discipline in plywood kill houses, and the hand signals that survived rotor wash and suppressed fire. Atlas learned fast, worked silent, and never broke a search pattern once committed. Mercer used to joke that Atlas had a map inside his skull and no patience for human shortcuts. On Deployment 3, outside Sangin, Atlas alerted on a pressure plate line hidden under a market road and stopped a convoy 2 vehicles short of trigger range. 5 Marines, 1 corpsman, 1 interpreter walked back because of that halt. Mercer died 6 months later from an IED strike on a different route. No canine team attached. Atlas searched for him after the blast until handlers pulled him off. Spencer met Atlas the following year during pre-mission integration in Kandahar. The dog had already completed enough work for a full career and still moved like current tense. Tan and black saddleback coat that turned gold in sunlight and dark as iron in shadow. Eyes the color of burnt honey. Left ear tip notched from concertina wire. He evaluated handlers with a hard stare before granting trust. With Spencer, he took 2 days, then leaned his shoulder against Spencer's thigh during a debrief, and never fully withdrew that allegiance again. Their 4th mission together produced the injury that followed both of them home. Compound breach on Kandahar's western edge. Moonless, dry wind. Stacked mud walls, narrow entry, hostile fire from the second room before first light. Atlas cleared the threshold ahead of the element, hit on command, and flagged an explosives cache behind grain sacks while rounds cracked overhead. On extraction, a fragmentation burst from an improvised device near the courtyard gate sent shrapnel through his left hip and lower flank. The sound came first. A hard metallic snap and dirt spray. Atlas stumbled once, tried to re-engage, then collapsed to a knee and dragged himself forward anyway, still tracking the threat vector. Spencer reached him under cover, hooked both arms under the harness, and hauled him behind a half wall while the medic worked clamps and pressure dressing with hands already slick from 2 other casualties. Atlas's breathing went ragged. His teeth clicked once against pain and then locked shut. He never snapped. Not once. They made medevac that night by 4 minutes. Surgery saved the leg, but not the old gait. Atlas recovered through hydro sessions, controlled load drills, and months of anti-inflammatory rotations that made him drowsy and irritable in the mornings. The command downgraded his projected longevity. Spencer adjusted everything else. Shorter sprint intervals, tighter turn protocols, extended warm-ups before scent work. Atlas adapted faster than any chart predicted. By last winter, he was still outperforming younger dogs on discrimination lanes, though no one in procurement liked data that complicated replacement schedules. Contractors wanted clean turnover. New dogs justified new budgets. Older dogs with scars and opinions disrupted procurement timelines. In Ridgemont, the contractor assessment that stamped Atlas too old came from a 3-person panel hired through a Hartwell-linked security vendor. 12-minute mobility screen, 1 stair test, 1 obedience pass in a bright lobby with 0 operational stressors. The lead evaluator marked mild hind limb compensation and recommended retirement from active response environments with unpredictable aggression vectors. Spencer signed receipt and wrote 1 sentence in block letters across his copy. Assessment failed to evaluate field alert reliability under live threat conditions. 2 nights later, Atlas alerted outside Gavin's locker room and refused to move until Spencer photographed a smear of fresh adhesive under the latch plate and logged an unauthorized key scrape pattern around the strike. Security called it maintenance residue. Spencer bagged a sample anyway and submitted it through base lab channels. The analysis came back 48 hours later, industrial epoxy blend used in covert camera mounts. The next alert came near the locked pharmacy door at 2:18 a.m. Atlas froze, ears forward, low growl. Spencer clocked a sweet chemical trace under disinfectant, checked access logs, and found 3 after-hours entries tied to a temporary admin badge assigned to a Hartwell contractor. He filed the discrepancy and copied compliance plus military liaison. No response for 3 days. Then an email said records were under reconciliation, and no immediate threat was identified. The third alert came outside ICU Supply, same corridor where Lena later lost air under Gavin's hand. Atlas stopped cold, nose lifting, then pressed toward the lower shelf bay behind the coded door. Spencer requested inventory audit authority and got delayed pending administrative approval. He noted the delay, date-stamped it, and added 1 more page to the file he kept in a weatherproof binder beside his apartment door. He knew what people thought when they saw that binder. Obsessed, rigid, unable to let things go. He had buried too many good men to confuse letting go with wisdom. On the night the corridor closed around Lena's throat, Atlas had already built the map. The old dog had read the pattern, flagged the fault lines, and refused to be retired into silence by a label designed for convenience. He was not proving usefulness. He was bearing witness with teeth, training, and memory. Rex or no retirement memos, dogs like Atlas did not forget the scent of fear attached to a specific man. Neither did Spencer. And in the corridor, the cost of that memory sat in his posture, like steel, while Lena's airway narrowed under Gavin Hartwell's hand. Her heels scraped again, a dry rubber sound on waxed tile. The door edge bit between her shoulder blades, and her lungs kept trying to pull a breath through a throat that gave them almost nothing. The room had not changed in the last few seconds. The monitor alarms still chirped and died. The fluorescent lights still flattened everyone into pale faces and dark eyes. Gavin's phone still pointed at her, like this was content. But Lena felt the full shape of the moment now, not as panic alone, but as pattern. April's torn scrub seam, the slashed tire, the blocked number, the hospital that converted harm into paperwork. 21 witnesses stayed in that loop. 21 chances to stop a crime inside a building that claimed healing as a mission statement. Margot stood near the code phone with both hands braced on the desk as if the laminate could keep her upright. Keisha's jaw trembled once, then locked. The intern's pen hovered above a chart he had never actually read. The janitor's mop dripped in slow taps that marked time better than the wall clock. The security guard, Morales, finally held his radio at chest level, thumb near the transmit key, still not pressing it. Lena tried to force words around Gavin's palm. Please. It came out thin and torn. Gavin tilted his phone to catch the angle where her face looked weakest. His gloves smelled like leather and sanitizer. His breath carried mint and stale coffee. He watched the screen more than he watched her because men like him trusted distance even while they used their hands. At 3:08 a.m., Lena's vision tunneled hard enough that the corridor edges darkened, and one thought cut through all the noise in clean, practical language. Mateo had to hear her voice at 6:35. She drove her fingers into Gavin's wrist again. Not enough leverage to break him. Enough pressure to remind herself she still had a body, still had training, still had a next action. The same reflex that kept casualties alive under mortar fire kept firing now, narrow and stubborn. Across from her, Atlas held position beside Spencer's left knee. 87 pounds of discipline warning. His ears stayed pinned forward. His body stayed locked. The growl in his chest rolled low enough to vibrate in Lena's ribs through the choke pressure. The old left hip trembled once under load, then steadied. He did not look at faces. He looked at the hand on Lena's throat. The corridor registered that detail and began to fracture along moral lines. The transport tech with the stretcher took another step back and lifted both palms as if proving he was uninvolved. One nurse glanced at the exit sign and stayed put. Another finally reached for her badge reel, dropped it, and cursed under her breath, then left it on the floor. Morales swallowed, eyes jumping from Gavin's monogrammed cuff to Spencer's camo to Atlas's teeth, just visible behind his lip line. Nobody could pretend this was horseplay anymore, not with Lena's feet slipping. Not with Atlas reading target anatomy in real time. Spencer moved 1/2 step to clear his angle. His boots were quiet, but the motion pulled every gaze in the hallway. He did not announce rank. He did not explain policy. His eyes tracked once across the scene in fast order. Gavin's elbow position, phone hand, wrist pressure on Lena's trachea, Lena's knees, wet patch from the mop bucket, distance to wall, camera dome over the fire door. Calculations sat behind his calm like a closed blade. Lena saw him through watering eyes and thought of the consult room at 6:41, of Atlas pressing his muzzle to her pulse, of Spencer saying 4 words he did not spend easily. "You won't stand alone." Gavin saw the same man and mistook silence for hesitation. "Last warning," he said, lifting his chin toward Spencer without loosening his grip. "Walk away." His voice carried the polished boredom of someone issuing instructions to staff. The hand on Lena's throat stayed hard. The phone stayed up. Spencer said nothing yet. Atlas's growl deepened. His hackles climbed in a ridge from shoulder to spine. He shifted his front paws by inches, setting traction around the weak hip with veteran economy, as if his body remembered every slick floor he had ever worked. Lena's breath snagged and failed. A black fringe crept over the outer edges of her vision. She heard, absurdly clear, a child's voice from 2 mornings earlier through a phone speaker. "Copy that, Doc Tia." The memory hit like pain and oxygen together. She shoved at Gavin's thumb with both hands and got a sliver of space. He crushed it shut. "Say it," he whispered to her, then louder for the phone. "Say you lied." Morales made a sound in his throat, a start and stop, and finally keyed his radio. "Security, to ICU corridor," he said, voice cracking on the first word. "Need immediate—" Gavin snapped his gaze toward him and barked, "Stand down." Morales froze again with the radio inches from his mouth. That was the room Lena had been living in for months. Not ignorance, permission. Spencer's jaw scar tightened once, then smoothed. He took one more step and stopped at a distance where every movement could finish fast. He kept one hand on the leash, not pulling, just connected. Atlas rose a fraction with him, weight forward now, ready. Lena coughed against Gavin's palm. Pain flashed down her neck and into her chest. Her legs buckled and caught again. She understood exactly how close she was to dropping. Spencer spoke. "Let her go." 3 words. Flat. No heat, no volume. The effect was immediate and strange. Conversation in adjacent pods died. A rolling medication cart stopped mid-wheel at the far nurse's station. Even the telemetry beeps seemed farther away for one suspended second, while everyone waited to see whether inherited power could still command the outcome. Gavin laughed, but it came out thinner than before. "My father owns this hospital." He said it like a spell that had worked every time. Spencer did not blink. "Not tonight." Atlas rose to full height on that cue, hindquarters gathering despite the old Kandahar injury, body forming a clean line between Lena and the corridor's cowardice. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He presented consequence. Gavin's eyes flicked down at the dog and back to Spencer. For the first time, he looked all the way at the man instead of through him. He registered the NWU Type 3 uniform worn like armor, the scar on the jaw, the scarred hands, the stillness that did not negotiate. He registered that Spencer had already chosen an outcome and was simply offering one legal exit. "Call your leash off," Gavin said, voice sharper now. "You touch me. You're done in this county." Spencer's expression stayed level. "You're done now." Lena felt the pressure on her throat shift by a few millimeters as Gavin adjusted his grip to keep filming and keep control at the same time. It was a tiny error, but it gave her one rough inhale, and that inhale gave her enough oxygen to focus. She saw the opening in his stance. She saw how his right shoulder had drifted high around the phone. She saw what Spencer had already seen. Atlas saw it too. His ears pinned tighter, his body locked harder. The growl rolled into a lower register that traveled up from tile into calf muscle and spine. Old age lived in his hip. Service lived everywhere else. Keisha took one step toward Lena, stopped, then took another. Margot reached for the code phone and this time dialed without asking permission from anyone. The intern finally put his chart down and moved to the wall, clearing lane. The janitor dragged his mop bucket backward out of the path with shaking hands. Small axe, late axe, axe anyway. Gavin noticed the bystanders shifting and tried to seize the room back by force. He tightened again, pulling Lena's chin up so the camera could catch her face. "Look at me," he hissed at her. "You don't get to—" Atlas's front paw lifted and set one precise step forward. No wasted movement. Spencer's leash hand gave him exactly that inch and no more. Gavin flinched. It was barely visible. A quick recoil at the shoulder, but everyone saw it. And once fear showed on his face, the hierarchy he relied on began to collapse in plain sight. He looked at Spencer again, searching for bluff, for anger, for any signal he could manipulate. He found none. What he met instead was combat calm, the kind that had outlived mortars, breach charges, and 19-minute silences. A calm that did not rise when threatened because it had already moved past threat into execution. Lena saw the realization reach him in stages. First irritation, then uncertainty, then the first clean line of alarm. Spencer did not fill the silence with speeches. "Last chance," he said. Gavin's phone shook once in his hand. The screen caught a warped reflection of his own face beside Lena's bruising throat, and Atlas's fixed stare. For the first time that night, Gavin looked like a young man who understood he had entered a room his father did not own. His grip stayed on Lena, but the confidence inside it cracked. He felt it. She felt it. Every witness in that corridor felt it. The precise moment inherited immunity stopped functioning, and consequence stepped within reach. Consequence stepped within reach, and Spencer took it. He moved on Gavin's choking arm with a tight inside turn. One scarred hand on the wrist, the other at the elbow, a clean joint break in leverage without a strike. Gavin's grip tore off Lena's throat. Air hit her lungs like fire. She dropped to one knee against the supply room door, coughing hard, both hands at her neck, eyes streaming. Gavin shouted, more startled than hurt, and tried to yank free while still clutching his phone. Atlas launched one step, no wasted force, and clamped down on the sleeve and wrist line just below the hand that held the device. Not flesh, control. The phone hit tile with a crack and skidded under the nurse's desk. "Don't move," Spencer said. 3 words. Flat. For the first time that night, security moved first instead of last. Morales closed the distance with his partner from the far fire door, both of them breathing hard like they had run uphill inside their own shame. One snapped restraints onto Gavin's free wrist. The other reached for Atlas and stopped when Spencer lifted 2 fingers. "Hold," Spencer said to the dog. Atlas held, teeth still set on fabric, body locked, old left hip trembling under load and refusing to fail. Lena stayed low, drawing ragged breaths, and Keisha dropped beside her with an oxygen cannula and a trembling hand. "Easy, Doc. Easy," she whispered, voice breaking. Margot pressed gauze wrapped in cold saline against the bruising line under Lena's jaw and barked toward the station. "Code Gray is active. House supervisor now. And call county EMS because I don't trust this floor tonight." Gavin twisted against restraints and found his voice again. "You are all finished. My father owns this hospital." Nobody answered him. Morales keyed his radio with a steadier hand this time. "Detained subject in ICU corridor. Male, 24, Hartwell. Possible felony assault in progress on camera. Request county deputies and independent intake." Independent intake. He said it loudly on purpose. The intern, who had fake-written notes, pressed himself against the wall and stared at Lena's neck. "I saw him do it before," he said to no one and everyone. "Radiology hall. November. I didn't report it." He started crying and did not wipe his face. Spencer crouched by Lena just long enough to check pupil response and airway symmetry. "Can you swallow?" he asked. She nodded once, then winced and tried again with a whisper. "Hurts." "Stay still." At 3:19 a.m., under the camera dome with its red recording light still blinking, Spencer pointed to the cracked phone under the desk. "Bag that device now. Chain of custody starts here." House Supervisor Elkins arrived in slippers under her slacks, hair net half on, and looked from Gavin in restraints to Lena on the floor to Atlas, braced like a loaded spring. "Who authorized this?" she asked weakly. Lena found enough voice to answer. "Felony assault, on camera. Authorize evidence preservation, or I'll name you in the report." Elkins swallowed. "Preserve everything," she said. "Now." By 3:41 a.m., county deputies were in the corridor with body cams running and a state health investigator patched in by phone from night duty. Malcolm Hartwell reached the floor 3 minutes later in a cashmere coat over silk pajamas, 2 attorneys at his shoulders, fury polished into boardroom diction. "This is an internal personnel misunderstanding," Malcolm said, eyes on Elkins, not on Lena. "Release my son and send everyone home." Spencer stood between Malcolm and the gurney where respiratory therapy was scanning Lena's airway. Atlas sat at heel, chest still vibrating with residual growl. Spencer said nothing. He didn't have to. Deputy Shaw held up an evidence bag with Gavin's phone inside. "Sir, we have active assault video and witness statements. This scene is no longer internal." Malcolm turned to the deputy and lowered his voice. "I fund half your equipment line." Shaw did not flinch. "Not this report." That was the second crack. The third came from data. At 4:12 a.m., hospital IT director Priya Nan stepped into the consult room with a portable drive and a printed packet. She had been the woman who usually avoided eye contact when Hartwell names were spoken. Tonight, she set the packet down in front of Deputy Shaw and said, "Per emergency legal hold, we pulled corridor footage, badge logs, and extension records before anything could be altered. She slid one sheet forward. Extension 77 call attempts. 17 aborted dials over 6 weeks from this unit. During incidents linked to Gavin Hartwell? Another sheet. Camera outages in Garage Row C and Pharmacy Corridor happened during contractor maintenance windows approved by Hartwell Security Solutions. Another. Temporary admin badge entries at Pharmacy 2:18 a.m. 3 nights in December, assigned to Hartwell contractor IDHSS-443. Spencer added his own weatherproof binder to the table. Epoxy sample chain form. Lab result identifying covert camera adhesive. Photos of key scrape pattern. Atlas alert logs with timestamps. He placed each page down in order, as if laying charges. Lena watched from the exam chair with an ice collar and hoarse silence, while Margot handed over the manila envelope from Lena's trunk, still marked Ortiz. Personal. Mateo's spare cleats in a grocery bag beside it because Margot had grabbed both without sorting. Inside, printed texts, screenshots, voicemail transcript, names and dates. Deputy Shaw looked at the stack and said, "This is not one night." "No," Lena whispered. "It's a system." At 4:58 a.m., April, the respiratory therapist, with the torn scrub seam, walked in wearing a winter coat over pajamas and gave a signed statement with hands that shook only once. At 5:07, a pharmacy tech who had resigned sent her own videos from a private backup and confirmed narcotics diversion tied to Gavin's contractor badge access. At 5:16, the intern gave a recorded interview admitting he had falsified chart activity to avoid intervening. At 5:22, Morales confessed he had received verbal instructions from Hartwell security supervisors to de-escalate by non-engagement when Gavin appeared in restricted zones. Layer by layer, protection failed. At 6:03 a.m., state investigators arrived in person and took control of the evidence room. At 6:11, Malcolm Hartwell was escorted out of the ICU floor after attempting to speak privately with witnesses. At 6:18, the board's emergency council voted by phone to place him on immediate administrative leave pending inquiry. At 6:26, the compliance office called Lena back on her old ethics case number and told her the file had been marked closed without investigators' sign-off. The blocked "This call did not occur" number traced to a contractor retained by Hartwell Counsel. That recording went into the felony packet. At 6:35 a.m., while deputies transported Gavin in restraints past the stainless letters of the Hartwell Pediatric Tower, county prosecutors filed preliminary charges: felony assault, unlawful restraint, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, narcotics diversions conspiracy, and coercion linked to blackmail media stored in a cloud account auto-synced from the seized phone. His own uploads buried him. At 7:02 a.m. in board conference room B, the stainless Hartwell nameplate was lifted off the table and set face down. No ceremony, just removal. By 7:40, hush agreements tied to prior complaints were suspended by court order for fraud review. By 8:05, Hartwell Security Solutions contracts were voided for cause. By 8:32, the county announced an external monitor for hospital security and complaint handling. People who had stared at boots, charts, and mop buckets all winter now signed statements with full names. Some never did. One board member who had watched everything from behind legal language resigned before interview and left town by noon. His silence was entered in record as refusal to cooperate. At 9:14 a.m., after CT confirmed no fracture and ENT documented severe soft tissue injury without airway collapse, Lena sat in a dim staff room with a paper cup of warm water and opened her phone for the call she had promised herself she would make. Mateo answered on the second ring, hair wild, backpack on one shoulder. "Doc Tia, you sound funny," he said, smiling anyway. Long night, she whispered. He squinted at the screen. Your neck is purple. I know. She forced a gentle grin. Seatbelt from a fast day. He accepted the lie children accept when they are choosing trust over detail. Story. She nodded and opened the picture book she kept in her locker, the one about a stubborn old shepherd who kept finding lost hikers in snow. Her voice rasped on every page. Mateo listened like it was music. Across the room, Spencer stood by the vending machine and finally let his shoulders drop. Atlas crossed to him, slow from the hip, and pressed his head into Spencer's chest, exactly where Nolan Reed's memorial coin rested in a pocket under the camo blouse. Spencer's scarred hand settled behind Atlas's ears. He closed his eyes for one full breath, then another, the first unguarded exhale anyone in Ridgemont had seen from him. Lena finished the story. Mateo held up his own stuffed dog in salute. Good job, old guy, he said to the screen. Atlas lifted his head at the word old, ears rotating toward Lena's phone, then leaned harder into Spencer. At 10:22 a.m., procurement sent an urgent disclosure to investigators. The too old for active response recommendation on Atlas had been rushed through a non-standard contractor path, initiated from Gavin's executive guest account, bypassing veterinary command review. Attached emails showed the intent in plain text. Sideline the dog that keeps flagging corridors. Spencer read that line once, jaw tightening, then handed the printout to Deputy Shaw without comment. By noon, the label was revoked in writing. Atlas remained on conditional active status under Spencer's command, with independent veterinary oversight and documented commendation appended to his service file. Alert reliability materially contributed to exposure of criminal conduct and protection of staff safety. Not useful. Essential. Before Lena left for home rest with discharge papers and a strict voice rest order she already planned to violate for bedtime reading, she stopped beside Spencer and Atlas in the service elevator lobby. The disinfectant smell had faded under fresh coffee and cold winter air sneaking through a loading bay door. Thank you, she whispered. Spencer shook his head once. You documented. Atlas nudged Lena's forearm, gentle, then sat back with that old soldier dignity that made even exhausted nurses smile through red eyes. Outside, the Hartwell letters were still on the tower, but now they marked a crime scene file, not a crown. If you carried this story to the end, carry this part too. Silence protects power, but records, witnesses, and one old dog can still break a whole machine before sunrise.